The man mocked math at a congressional hearing, then a black girl made the entire house fall silent. Math doesn't matter when you're picking fruit or rapping in a studio. The congressman laughed, his voice bouncing off the marble walls like a taunt from history itself. The room, packed with lawmakers and cameras, chuckled along, everyone except the 13-year-old black girl in the second row. Amira's hands clenched the thin edge of her printed notebook. Not because she was scared, because she was calculating. Again, not formulas, not equations, no. She was calculating silence, the way it grows, hardens, and then cracks under the weight of truth. The hearing was titled Educational Equity and National Standards Reform, but by the second hour it had unraveled into the usual theater. Blame the teachers, blame the students, blame the parents, but never the system. Congressman Reynolds from Georgia's 14th district had gone off script with his rant about math being overhyped, just as Amira had feared. She hadn't come here for this. Not to be humiliated. She had come with her mother, a public school principal, to testify. Amira had prepared for weeks, memorized her numbers, practiced inflection, read data reports on racial gaps in AP Calculus. She had even chosen a soft yellow dress so she'd seem approachable to the panel. None of it mattered now, until someone called her name. Next speaker, Amira Lattimore, student witness. A few heads turned. One aide even double-checked the clipboard. A child testifying? That wasn't common. The room hummed, shifting in their seats, ready for a sweet story or a scripted plea. What they got instead was revolution in 4 feet 11 inches form. Amira approached the microphone with slow, deliberate steps. Her braids swung slightly behind her back. Her face, solemn. She didn't look at Congressman Reynolds. She didn't have to. Her words were for the record, for history, for every black child who had ever been told they weren't math people. My name is Amira Lattimore. I'm 13 years old, and I'm here today because apparently, math is up for debate. The room paused. She continued, voice steady. I go to North Anacostia Middle School in D.C. We don't have new textbooks. Some days we don't have working heat. Our school was given a priority improvement label by the Department of Education. You know what that means? It means I've had 3 different math teachers in 1 year. You know what else? I still love math. The chairman shifted in his seat. I love it because numbers don't lie. People do. Numbers don't care what neighborhood you're from, or how much your parents make. They just are. Constant. Like gravity. Like truth. But in this room, I've heard more jokes about my future than commitments to change it. She turned finally toward Congressman Reynolds. You say math isn't useful to kids like me. You say I'll be picking fruit or rapping in a studio. So here's a number for you, sir. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says jobs in math-related fields are growing by 27% over the next decade. Know what else? Only 8% of black students are represented in advanced math courses. Is that because we're not capable? Or because someone decided we didn't need to be? The silence was absolute. She inhaled. I got a perfect score on the state math exam last year. But when I asked to skip a grade, the counselor said, and I quote, "We don't want to set you up to fail." I wasn't being set up to fail. I was being held back to keep others comfortable. The words didn't quiver. They detonated. A congresswoman near the back adjusted her glasses. One man actually lowered his phone. Even the stenographer had stopped typing for a moment, her fingers hovering in the air. Amira looked down, flipped a page. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fair treatment. And I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because this country claims to be about opportunity, but only for the kids who already have it. She closed the notebook. So, Congressman Reynolds, next time you joke about how useless math is for black kids, remember this. One of those kids just corrected your date on national television. She stepped back from the mic. No one clapped. Not yet. It was too raw. Too precise. Applause would have felt cheap in that moment, like tossing pennies into a fire and hoping it wouldn't burn your hand. Her mother, seated nearby, wiped a tear. Not because Amira had made her proud, she had done that every day since she was born, but because this time, the world had seen it. Cameras flashed. Microphones leaned forward. Journalists whispered and scribbled. But Amira didn't flinch. She walked back to her seat like she'd just given a pop quiz. Congressman Reynolds was rubbing his chin, smiling, but the kind that people wear when they've just been checkmated in public. He leaned toward his aide and said something no one heard. And then, the chairman spoke. Thank you, Ms. Lattimore. That was illuminating. He shuffled his notes. No rebuttal, no redirection, just silence. Until the ripple began. Congresswoman Elena Torres from New Mexico asked for the transcript to be entered into the permanent record. Senator McKinley requested the video clip. Someone else asked if Amira would be willing to consult on a new national curriculum task force. The tide had shifted, and Amira, who had once been told to stay quiet and be respectful, had just done the opposite and changed the tone of the hearing entirely. By the time they left the Capitol steps that afternoon, Amira's name was trending. News outlets labeled her the math girl who shut down Congress. But Amira didn't care about that. What she cared about was this. Her best friend Tasha had texted her during the ride home. Tasha, I saw it. I saw everything. They heard you. Amira, did they really? Tasha, yes. And now I believe I can do it too. That meant more than any headline. But back in Georgia, Congressman Reynolds had other plans. Plans that would make the next few weeks even more dangerous for Amira, her school, and the quiet army of students rising behind her name. Because power doesn't yield easily, especially when it's been embarrassed, especially by a girl who dared to be smarter than it. And while the country celebrated her, someone else had begun digging through her past, looking for cracks, looking for anything they could use to take her down. Because racism doesn't retreat, it reloads. But what none of them knew, what even Amira herself hadn't yet realized, was that she hadn't even begun to fight. Not really. And the math? It was only the beginning. The smear campaign started quietly, the way a storm begins with an unnatural stillness. A few conservative outlets ran headlines like, "Who is this so-called math prodigy? And 13-year-old activist or political puppet?" Talk radio hosts mocked her scripted speech, while one pundit accused her mother of using Amira as a racial pawn for liberal agendas. But the real venom came on social media. Amira's face was plastered on Twitter threads filled with slurs, doctored photos, and hashtags designed to humiliate. One user posted a fake screenshot of Amira's alleged disciplinary record, implying she had once been suspended for cheating. Completely false. Amira wasn't on Twitter, but her classmates were. And so was her principal. Dr. Lattimore, the very mother who had walked into Congress with her daughter just days ago now, found herself reading anonymous threats emailed to the school. One message simply read, "Tell your little genius to stay in her lane before she ends up as another hashtag." That night, Amira heard her mother crying behind the locked bathroom door. Not sobbing, but that quiet, broken kind of crying that feels like it's being swallowed back down the throat. Amira knocked. "Mom." Dr. Lattimore cleared her throat. "I'm okay, baby. Go finish your geometry." But the geometry book lay unopened that night. Instead, Amira scrolled through a printout of the federal education budget she had requested from her social studies teacher. Line by line, she circled numbers, allocations, shortfalls, disparities in district funding. The pain only made her more precise. At school, the response had split. Half the teachers treated her like glass. Too fragile. Too brilliant, as if speaking to her the wrong way might make her snap or vanish. The other half avoided her entirely, clearly resenting the attention. She wasn't just that student anymore, she was the student, the one who'd taken on Congress and made them flinch. But it was the students that changed the most. Some classmates had started calling her Ms. C-SPAN, sometimes admiring, sometimes sarcastic. The popular kids didn't know what to do with her anymore. She didn't fit their hierarchy. But others' kids she barely knew before began quietly approaching her. A freshman boy from Ghana handed her a folded piece of paper in the hallway. "I want to join," he said. "Join what?" He just smiled. "Whatever you're doing." By Friday, 8 kids had met her in the library after school. They didn't ask for selfies. They didn't ask about Congress. They asked what they could do next. So Amira did what she always did. She created a plan. They called themselves Numbers. Nurturing underrated minds by empowering real students. They didn't start with speeches. They started with tutoring, organizing, research. They combed through data on school funding inequalities, built spreadsheets, wrote reports. Amira showed them how to break down raw data and build arguments. Real ones. The kind that shut up smug men in suits. But outside their library bubble, a darker force was rising. Congressman Reynolds had gone quiet for several days. Then he made his move. He introduced a new education bill titled the Cultural Objectivity in Classrooms Act, a name that sounded harmless until you read the fine print. The bill proposed removing socio-political rhetoric from K-12 curriculum, defunding programs that promoted racialized victimhood, and requiring all guest speakers, yes, including students, to be pre-approved by a state oversight board. Translation: no more Amiras. The language was subtle, surgical, but Amira saw it for what it was, a silencing tool. She read the bill 3 times in one night, annotating each section until the margins bled blue ink. Then she called her mom into the room. "We need to go back." "Back where?" "To Capitol Hill." Dr. Lattimore hesitated. "They're trying to shut you down. Not just you. All of you." "Exactly," Amira said. "They picked the wrong math girl." A week later, they returned, but this time, Amira didn't come alone. She brought 17 students with her, from 5 different schools: black, brown, white, Asian, undocumented, neurodivergent, queer. All of them armed with data binders and stories, each one ready to testify. But even as they sat in the waiting chamber, a security officer approached them. "You're Amira Lattimore?" "Yes." He handed her a folded notice. It was a procedural denial. "The committee has limited public testimony today," he explained. "Your time has been cut." Amira didn't blink. "By how much?" "Down to 2 minutes." She nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll just have to make them count." When she stood again before Congress, she didn't wear yellow. She wore navy blue, sharp and clean, her hair pulled back tight. Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical. "You are trying to legislate silence. But silence doesn't change the math." She tapped the folder. "Inequity is measurable. You can track it in enrollment rates, in bathroom conditions, in gifted program representation. You can calculate it in square feet of mold in gymnasiums or the price tags on textbooks written before I was born." She narrowed her eyes toward the committee. "You say you want objectivity? Then here it is. Your bill targets kids who speak up. It hides behind the idea of neutrality, but it's designed to erase our experience." A pause. "But I won't be erased." This time, applause broke through before she even finished. Her time was cut, but her message had landed. Backstage, Amira leaned against the cool wall, breathing hard. The students hugged. Some cried. One of the boys, who had never spoken in public before, whispered, "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." But it wasn't over. Reynolds' team responded the next morning with a leaked screenshot from an old disciplinary file. It showed Amira's name connected to an incident in 3rd grade. Insubordination during standardized testing, refused to put calculator away. The media pounced. Fox News labeled her troubled. A major podcast host asked if she had authority issues. The narrative shifted again from truth teller to problem child. But this time, Amira didn't hide. She posted the full story to her own school's website, a scanned version of her own 3rd grade suspension form, next to a video of her explaining exactly what happened. "I wasn't cheating," she said. "I was challenging a rule that made no sense. I knew how to do the problem. I just didn't want to do it slower for someone else's comfort." The video went viral. Even her 3rd grade teacher, now retired, publicly apologized for the suspension. And then something miraculous happened. Across the country, students began organizing their own numbers chapters. From Oakland to Tulsa to Brooklyn, teens printed Amira's speech and read it at school board meetings. Teachers, once too afraid, started speaking up too, because one girl had made it okay to be loud. Then came the night of the televised debate. Reynolds had agreed to appear on CNN to defend his bill. What he didn't expect was that the producers had also invited Amira. At first, he tried to ignore her. He smiled condescendingly, referred to her as young lady and the student activist. But midway through the segment, Amira leaned forward and said calmly, "Congressman, you keep saying this bill isn't about race. But if it were about math, you'd be citing data. You're not. You're telling stories that protect adults while harming children." He turned red. She didn't stop. "Every time you say keep politics out of classrooms, what you really mean is keep kids like me from speaking." The moderator's jaw tightened. The camera zoomed in. Reynolds fumbled. That night, a headline on NBC News read, "13-year-old math was dismantles congressman on live TV." But Amira didn't read it. She was too busy. Because something else had landed in her inbox. A letter from a public university in Michigan offering her early acceptance to their applied mathematics program. Full scholarship. She stared at it for a long time. Then she forwarded it to her entire numbers mailing list with one sentence. You don't have to wait until you're older to be heard. But even as victory mounted, one last challenge remained. The vote on the Cultural Objectivity in Classrooms Act was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and Reynolds had stacked the room with supporters. Amira wasn't afraid, but she wasn't naive either. She knew they had the numbers, in power, in money, in institutional muscle. But she also had numbers, real ones, and she was about to use them. 2 days before the final vote, Amira walked into the Rayburn building with nothing but a backpack, a flash drive, and a carefully ironed blazer 2 sizes too big for her. She had asked for a private meeting not with the full House committee, but with a single person, Congressman David Reynolds. To everyone's surprise, he agreed. She stepped into his office alone. Her mother waited outside, chewing her lip like it was her last shield. The receptionist didn't even make eye contact as Amira passed. Reynolds stood near the window, looking out at the Capitol dome like he owned it. When he turned, the usual smirk was absent. You've got about 15 minutes, he said, folding his arms. I only need 10, Amira replied. She set her backpack down and took out a tablet. I want to show you something. He sighed but gestured for her to continue. She tapped the screen. A dashboard OpenEDA data visualization app she and her numbers team had coded themselves. It was clean, stark, brutally simple. This, Amira said, is the impact of your bill. She walked him through the numbers. 38 school districts had already preemptively canceled student-led forums out of fear of violating the bill's vague language. 22,000 students of color removed from advanced placement or STEM-focused programs, citing curricular reevaluation. A measurable 17% decrease in school board public testimonies since the bill was proposed and it hadn't even passed yet. She flipped to the final page. This isn't just about suppressing activism. It's about fear. You've turned schools into places where the truth is dangerous. And now even math, the purest language we have, is being politicized. Reynolds didn't look at the numbers. He looked at her. You came here to shame me? No, she said. I came to give you an out. He raised an eyebrow. Amira continued. Withdraw the bill. Not because I told you to, but because the country is watching. And one day, your grandchildren might ask why their last name shows up in textbooks next to words like censorship. Silence. Then a laugh, not mocking, but tired. You really think you can scare me with legacy? She paused, eyes locked on his. No, but I think the truth already has. He didn't respond. So she gathered her things and walked out. Not waiting for applause. Not needing it. Back at school, the pressure mounted. Numbers now had over 40 chapters in 17 states. Amira had become something more than a student. She was a movement. But movements, like people, get exhausted. Threats increased. Her phone was confiscated after someone airdropped a death threat to every iPad in her classroom. Her teachers were split between admiration and fatigue. And in the middle of it, all she had finals. One evening, while solving a linear regression problem at 11:30 p.m., her vision blurred. Her mother rushed in to find her asleep at the desk, pencil still in hand. Dr. Lattimore gently shook her awake. You're still 13, she whispered. No, Amira mumbled, half asleep. On the variable they didn't account for. The night before the vote, a candlelight vigil formed outside the Capitol. Thousands of students, educators, and parents stood in silence, holding math textbooks above their heads. One sign read, E equals MC squared, but R equals repression. Amira stood at the front, arms locked with Tasha and 3 others. The steps glowed gold under the candlelight. A reporter approached, asking if she had a final statement before the vote. She nodded. Yes, this bill won't stop us. Even if it passes, we'll keep calculating. We'll keep solving. You can't legislate truth out of existence. The next morning, Congress convened. C-SPAN streamed the hearing live. The gallery overflowed with youth. Numbers members in homemade shirts filled the back rows. Reynolds rose to speak. The Cultural Objectivity in Classrooms Act, he began, is not a tool of suppression. It is a call for neutrality, for balance, for the removal of bias in our sacred classrooms. He paused, scanning the room. Then he continued. But I've had time to reconsider. Whispers erupted. He cleared his throat. Yesterday, I was visited by a student who reminded me that objectivity without context becomes erasure. That silencing truth even under the banner of balance says still silence. I am withdrawing my support from the bill. Half the room stood. The other half stared in shock. Another representative, one who had co-sponsored the bill, rose quickly, flustered. This isn't procedure. This wasn't discussed. But it was too late. Momentum had shifted. One by one, others signaled their withdrawal. The committee chair turned pale. By noon, the bill was dead. Amira, watching from the gallery, didn't cheer. She just exhaled. Tasha grabbed her hand. You did it. No, Amira said. We did. She was back in school the next day. Not on a red carpet. Not on Good Morning America. In a cramped science lab, calculating a data set for greenhouse gas absorption. And yet, everything had changed. The hallways no longer echoed with derision. Students of all backgrounds asked her about organizing, about advocacy, about calculus. Teachers stopped her to say thank you. Some asked if she would consider sitting on advisory boards. But her proudest moment came 2 weeks later. A freshman boy, quiet, always scribbling, handed her a notebook. Inside was the start of a student proposal, an elective math course focused on real-world problems and racial equity in statistics. He had titled it, The Lattimore Equation. She laughed. You really named it after me? He shrugged. You're the variable that changed everything. That summer, Numbers held their first National Student Summit. Over 600 students attended. Workshops were led by high schoolers. Panels by middle schoolers. Amira stood on stage not as a keynote, but as a facilitator. She spoke less. She listened more. And that, she realized, was the real win, not the law, not the headlines, not even the scholarships. The real win was multiplication. Because the truth, when spoken boldly, doesn't add up. It multiplies. The following autumn, Amira's name was submitted unbeknownst to her for the National Medal of Youth Leadership. She didn't find out until the White House called her school. When the principal announced it during morning assembly, the cafeteria erupted. Even kids who once rolled their eyes at her clapped until their palms turned red. Amira stayed seated, stunned, blinking hard as her heart raced. But accolades weren't what moved her. Not anymore. What moved her was change. Measurable, data-backed change. By the end of the school year, Numbers had grown into a national network spanning 39 states. They'd hosted over 120 forums on equitable STEM education. Their toolkit had been downloaded over 80,000 times. A handful of school boards even rewrote their gifted program entry policies after consulting the group's equity report. Amira had become a symbol, but she refused to become a statue. She declined most media appearances. She stayed rooted, focused. Until one day, her mom placed an envelope on her bed. It was thick, cream-colored, embossed, sealed with gold foil. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Harvard. I didn't apply, Amira whispered, staring at it. You didn't have to, Dr. Lattimore said softly. They came looking. That night, Amira sat by the window of her bedroom, the city glowing beneath her. She didn't open the envelope. She didn't need to. For once, her future felt infinite, not because of prestige, but because she knew who she was, what she could do. And that terrified some people. One of those people was an anonymous figure known only online as a Sovereign Alpha, who began targeting Numbers chapters through harassment campaigns and doxing threats. They coordinated efforts to flood school boards with false complaints about the group's activities, claiming political indoctrination. Amira recognized the pattern. When truth wins, power retaliates. But this time, Numbers was ready. Each chapter had its own leadership, decentralized, each report backed by sources. Amira had trained them not just in speaking but in withstanding. And that's when it truly hit her: this movement no longer needed her at the center. She had built something that could live without her voice. That wasn't loss. That was legacy. At the closing summit in Atlanta, she addressed the full Numbers network for the last time before stepping down as national lead. They gathered in a vast auditorium. Hundreds of students in matching black and gold shirts. The projector glowed behind her, showing a timeline, from one girl to one nation. Amira stepped to the mic. I started this because I was angry, because I was underestimated, because I was tired of being called gifted only when I performed like someone else's idea of brilliance. Murmurs of agreement rippled across the crowd. But I'm leaving this role today because I believe in something even stronger than anger. I believe in multiplication. I believe in you. And I believe the greatest act of leadership is to make space for others to lead. She paused, eyes scanning a sea of raised fists. Just because I won my battle doesn't mean the war is over. Systems don't fall with speeches. They fall with strategy, with numbers, with consistency. She smiled. Be the variable. Thunderous applause. Stomping feet. Tears. Screams. The auditorium vibrated with collective hope. Afterward, as students swarmed her for hugs and final selfies, a quiet girl from Nevada handed her a card. No name. Just a message inside. Because of you, I didn't drop out. Because of you, I know my voice matters. Amira folded it gently, tucked it into her bag. That night, on the plane ride home, she whispered to herself, we did it. But fate wasn't done with her. 6 months later, she received a letter not from a university or government body but from a small rural district in Mississippi. It was from a principal named Mr. Thomas Bynes, who had fought to integrate STEM curriculum into a school with no Wi-Fi and no full-time math teacher. He wrote, one of my 8th graders printed your speech and gave it to the school board last month. You changed our funding conversation. We're getting internet installed next week. And she's been admitted to the state robotics team. She says her hero's name is Amira. Thought you should know. That name Amira was now whispered in classrooms far beyond DC. Not as a celebrity, but as a proof of concept. That brilliance can rise from the places most people overlook. That students aren't too young to fight for equity. That numbers, wielded with integrity, can rewrite the narrative. She had once stood trembling behind a mic in Congress. Now, her words echoed through policy meetings, graduation speeches, district memos. At age 15, she was invited to co-author a national equity framework for math curriculum. At 16, she launched the Lattimore Institute for Quantitative Justice, a nonprofit that trained marginalized youth in using math as a tool for activism. And at 17, in the same Capitol Hill steps where she once stood holding her mother's hand, she was asked to testify again. This time, not as a student, but as an advisor to the U.S. Department of Education. She opened her testimony with a smile and said, funny how the same room that tried to silence me now calls me expert witness. But her final words that day were the ones she'd been waiting to say for years. I'm not here today because I beat the system. I'm here because I exposed it. And because students across this country are ready to do more than learn theory, ready to lead. By the time she turned 18, school textbooks had changed. A new section under contemporary civil youth leaders featured her story. It didn't exaggerate. It didn't idolize. It simply told the truth. That a girl walked into a room built to ignore her and made it listen. That she answered cruelty with precision, power with purpose. That she calculated her way through systemic bias like a theorem until truth became unavoidable. And somewhere in a school just like hers, a kid opened that page, read her name, and whispered, if she did it, maybe I can too. And so the numbers keep rising. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.